What do I know to be true about God? For most of my life, this has been a question for which I could not offer a convincing answer. My first memory of confronting the question is from 1963, when I was 8 years old. I remember this vividly because we were on a ship traveling from Liverpool to Valparaiso in Chile. This was a 3-week voyage, and shipboard life included a lot of things: chapel on Sundays, and many other interesting things. I remember one Sunday telling my dad that I didn't believe in God, and I remember his reaction: "You must believe." In this respect, my dad was like C.S. Lewis, who said that we are what we believe we are. At any rate, it made an impression on me. I had expected sympathy from a fellow doubter, and instead, I found myself confronted with an unexpected believer. I'm pretty sure my own opinion of what was that whatever I was and whatever I believed, it didn't involve chapel that particular Sunday. Knowledge and belief are two different things, of course. But I think that when Lewis said we are what we believe we are, what he meant is that what we know about ourselves and what we believe must be the same. There's a discomfort at the center of this idea, a knowledge that we're not as good as we could be, and a belief that we should be better. The idea has a darker side, too. My friend Jack Goldberg was a universalist by inclination, but Jack had trouble with the teaching that God loves all of us. He had a particular problem with the Unitarian Universalist principle of the inherent worth and dignity of every person. You see, in April 1945, Jack was 18 years old and a U.S. infantryman in Germany, and he marched into a concentration camp as part of the liberation. He would ask, where was the inherent dignity of the people who ran the camps and orchestrated that mass murder? And I agree with him. In a larger sense, Jack had seen evil, and I know he felt that some things are beyond redemption. Most of us don't commit atrocities, but that does not mean that we're good, or even as good as we think we are. Let's go back to C.S. Lewis. Lewis wrote that we do not need God because we are good, but because being barely moral is a struggle for most of us. I used to think this was a very pessimistic view of why we believe, but I think it's actually something that Jack Goldberg would have agreed with. Lewis's link of God to meaning and morality was his own reaction to the rise of Nazi evil. He concluded that we must believe that there's more to our experience of life than what we too often experience. That God is the answer to the question, what are we doing here? I do not know whether my father ever read any of Lewis's work, but I know he had had his own more direct experience of evil in the form of 6 years in the British Army, 3 of them in Italy, and then a tour in Greece after the war was supposed to be over. I never thought of my dad as a particularly religious person in a church-going sense, but his conviction that we must believe is as clear to me today as it was when I was 8. I know this conviction is not the same as a provable truth, but it works for me. There's a lot of writing that argues that God is present in the sun rising and setting, in the coming of spring, and in our own special blue marble floating in the vastness of the universe. These are all beautiful things in which we live and move and have our being, and they're worthy of our praise. And maybe these works of the Lord mean that God is not that far from us. But for me, the vastness of the universe and the beauty of the earth are not enough. The music of the spheres is awe-inspiring and wonderful, but it's also cold and empty. And it's hard to relate our lives to a system where time basically has no meaning, and certainly no meaning in the context of our own lifespans. The earth and the universe sustain us and tolerate us, but it's questionable whether they need us, much less whether they care about us. If creation is a machine, it's hard to divine what part we play in it. So where is God, and what is true about God? There's a terrible randomness to our lives, and my consciousness, and I think yours, wants to make sense of it. My friend Jack Goldberg, was killed by a car. He was run over a block from his house on a snowy night in January 2016. The driver of the car never saw him. God is not watching over us in the sense of preventing bad things from happening. But that's not the point. My understanding of God is incomplete. It's only slightly more advanced than my dog's. But I think that perhaps it's about hope and not about certainty. Our lives are filled with uncertainty, but for the most part, especially when we're happy, they're also filled with trust and with hope. My dog feels this too. He trusts that there'll be dinner tonight. He trusts that there'll be breakfast tomorrow. And he hopes that somewhere in between there'll be a walk, a game, some snacks, maybe all three. He trusts that I love him. My own dog brain has learned to hope the same about God. How does this come back to evil and even to random bad luck? A lot of our King's Chapel service is based on the Psalms. And a lot of the Psalms are about pretty awful things. Lamentations about calamities that have befallen the Israelites. Calamities the Israelites pray God will visit on others. And warnings about what God will do to the wicked. It's this last part that interests me. That God punishes the wicked. And that righteousness or morality are rewarded. Look past the smiting in the Psalms, and the psalmist's prayers are about being our better selves and about hope. This is a powerful message to me about how we're supposed to live and have our being in this only world that we know. To me, the power of the message is best illustrated in the reaction of a small group of dedicated but fearful followers to the government's torture and killing, execution of their leader. This calamity could very well have been the end of the story. Smarter people would have gone into hiding, kept their heads down, looked after their families, forgot about the message of hope and change, and tried to stay out of trouble. But as we know, the disciples didn't do that. Instead, they had the courage to persist, to tell their story, to travel most of the known world, in the case of a couple of them, spread their hope, and in time, they turned the most powerful empire in the world on its head. That is something worth believing in. So, I don't know whether my father would agree with all of this, or any of it, but the older me knows that he was right, that we must believe. Amen.